Hey everyone, Tactics here with another Mythic Plus guide for Dragonflight Season 2, where in this video I'll be taking a look at one of the returning dungeons from Legion, NELTHARION'S Lair. In this video I'll be going through everything that you need to know about this dungeon, including spells you want to interrupt, abilities to stop with your stuns or other CCs, boss mechanics, and much more. At the end of this video, I'll also be including a simple pug-friendly route that you can use at the beginning of the season, and I'll link the MDT route down in the description as well. I've already got a couple of these guides out over on my channel, or linked down in the description below, with the rest on their way, and once those are done and the dungeons are out, I'll be posting advanced guides for all 8 dungeons, going through some tips and tricks on how to time them on higher key levels. So if that sounds like something that you want to see, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on that notification bell. With all that said, let's hop into the dungeon, starting off with some of the mobs that you'll encounter after jumping off a totally safe waterfall. To start, you've got the Ember Shard Scorpions here, and they've got a single ability in Impaling Shard, which is just a tank targeted physical hit that will leave a 6-second dot on them. This is stoppable with any form of CC, so I recommend doing that. Accompanying them are a bunch of Vile Shard Crawler ads. These guys are very small, they have much less HP, and all they really do is, on death, they leave an acid splatter puddle on the ground, which you just don't want to stand in. Along the water on the sides here are some basilisks, rockback gnashers, and these guys have another tank ability in Bone Chomp. This is an instant cast physical hit that leaves a dot on the tank, so in combination with that Impaling Shard, if you don't stop it, it can be a bit of pain for your tank. So make sure you're nice to your tank and you stop the Scorpion, as you can't stop this Bone Chomp, at least currently on the PR. Tarspitter lurkers are worms in this area. These guys will occasionally just submerge, leaving wherever the tank is and popping up on a random player, then shooting a frontal cone towards wherever the tank was relative to that player they submerged to. This frontal cone in Viscid Bile is stoppable, but you have a pretty short window because you want to stop it before the cast actually goes out. Otherwise, it's very, very dangerous. It's much bigger than it appears, so be aware of that. You can, of course, just sidestep this as well, but just be aware, pretty scary frontal attack here. When they die, they will also leave behind a puddle, though this one is called Rancid Ooze. You've got some Vile Shard mobs in this area as well. The smaller one is called a Chunk, and these guys have a single ability in Crush, which is just a 10-yard physical AoE around them, so if you don't want to run out of it, you can just stun the mob instead to prevent it from going off. The Hulks are much more dangerous in that they are lieutenant mobs, so you can't CC them, and they've got 2 frontal attacks aimed at the tank. The first is Fracture, which is a not dangerous physical hit, but does come with a knockback, so beware. There's some water, like I mentioned. There's also cliffs in this area, so don't get knocked off. And their second ability is one that might be familiar if you played during Season 1 in Piercing Shards. Exactly the same, basically, as the one from Azure Vault. However, this is very, very dangerous because you can't stop this mob. This mob is a lieutenant, so you will have to just eat these Piercing Shards, and at least currently on the PTR, this ability is casting twice back to back, so it's quite dangerous. You usually want to avoid these mobs, but just be aware if you do accidentally pull one, big defensives when that Piercing Shard cast goes out. Understone Dredges are also in this area, but these guys don't really do anything besides melee the tank. After jumping down a second totally safe waterfall, you'll find yourself in front of the first boss of the dungeon, Rokmora, who throughout this fight will spawn Blight Shard Skitterer ads one at a time, which are ads that you will want to make sure that you round up and cleave down with the boss, as when Rokmora reaches full energy, he'll use Shatter, and this deals physical damage to the entire party, on top of additional nature damage to all players for each living Skitterer, which also explodes them in the process, so they're no longer living then. When these Skitterers do die, they leave behind a small green puddle, just like the ads before the boss, and this will just deal ticking nature damage while you're inside of it, so avoid them as best you can. Outside of this, Rokmora will occasionally create crystalline ground around himself. This lasts for 10 seconds, slowly shrinking over time, and deals nature damage, but only to players that are moving while inside of it, so it's another reason to make sure that you're away from the Skitterer puddles. Just keep in mind, if you do get caught in a puddle when this goes out, it's always worthwhile to move out of the puddle and then plant. The crystalline damage is much less than the puddles. Lastly, this boss also has a tank frontal, of course, why wouldn't it? This one's called Razor Shards, but luckily, this one is avoidable. It does not follow the tank, so just aim this at either a wall or just away from everyone else, and then quickly step either through the boss or just behind him in general around him, away from this frontal ability, then move back to the original position that you were at after it goes off. After defeating the boss and taking a quick barrel ride, you'll be able to come to some more new adds. The Understone drummers in this area will basically just run to the nearest drum and try and bang it to summon some more Drogbar to assist. You can stop this war drum cast on the mob, and then you don't really need to worry about it from there then on, so just beware of that. One stop and you're done here if you ever pull a drummer. Mightstone Breakers are definitely the most dangerous mob in this area. These guys have just one ability in Avalanche, but it is currently extremely lethal. Basically what happens is a line attack targets the tank, so yet another frontal, but after that goes out, rocks will then fall from the sky, dealing damage after a short delay. Something to note about this second hit is that it is actually technically completely avoidable if you use movement abilities like disengage like heroically right after it comes out, or even if you are just strafing as the ability is being cast and you continue to strafe, not on top of where another player was, of course, because it falls under each player, but if you just continue strafing to a safe area, you will actually get out of the radius. It is a little bit hard to see. I expect this to be updated at some point because it is just so lethal in its current state, so either this ability is going to get nerfed or they're going to update the visual accordingly. Either way, be aware of these mobs. Rockbound Pelters in this area will just spam Jagged Disc at random players. This is just physical damage, nothing you can do about it. It will just constantly come out, and occasionally, to be annoying, these guys will also retreat, basically just a disengage towards wherever their back is facing, so keep that in mind when you're positioning these mobs. Blight Shard Shapers are casters in this area. These guys will just spam Stone Bolt at a random target. This is just nature damage, so make sure you kick that. And they will also occasionally spawn a Petrifying Totem. You can stop this cast, but if you don't, it'll spawn a totem kind of nearby, and if you stand in the radius, it'll deal damage and slowly petrify you after 10 seconds, so be aware of that. Burning Geos are the last mob here before the boss. And these guys just have a buff in Scorch on them, and it'll spawn swirlies under random players for 10 seconds. You can, however, stop these mobs again, and those swirlies will stop, but in general, they have very, very low health, similar to those crawlers at the beginning of the dungeon, so they'll die just relatively quickly from cleaving them down. Once you've cleared the area up here, you can tag Ularogg Cragshaper, and he'll jump down starting the boss fight. Only a few important abilities to be aware of here. The first is Strike of the Mountain, which will spawn hands surrounding 3 random players that will close in after a couple seconds, dealing nature damage if you're caught inside of them, so make sure that you step between the hands here and escape before they clap in on you. The boss will also spawn bellowing idols that you'll want to swap to, similar to that avalanche ability I mentioned earlier in the dungeon. This will just drop rocks, but only on 1 random player per idol here from the ceiling, and it deals, moderate damage, so you want to make sure that you do kill these ASAP, and usually the boss will spawn 2 of these back to back, so if you leave both of them up, it can be a problem, so just kill these as soon as you can. When Ularogg reaches full energy, he'll use Stance of the Mountain, and this will summon 4 of those bellowing idols, and then he'll transform into a 5th one before having all 5 of these idols move around quickly, kind of mixing like the cup game, basically. Eventually they will stop, and you'll want to kill the idol that contains the boss before you get overwhelmed by the constant barrage of falling debris. Outside of this, the boss just does a little tank hit in Sunder. Not too dangerous here, just some nature damage, but you should be of it. On your way to the 3rd boss, you'll find the Stone Claw Grubmasters. These guys have a little 5-yard physical AoE in Stone Shatter. You can just stand at max melee range if you're a melee DPS, but in general this isn't too scary, so not a big deal if you have to eat it. But the more important ability they have is Worm Call. This throws a Tar Spitter grub at a random player, and then this grub will do a 10-second cast, and if you don't stop this cast with a stun or other CC, it'll become a Rot Drool Grabber worm. Basically this worm is just stationary, has a big puddle around it, and it'll just constantly try and grip players into it. Definitely something you don't want to happen, so make sure whenever these worms come out, you do just commit a stop to prevent that cast from finishing. Outside of this entire area here is just filled with mobs that you've already seen, but once you get to the end of the hallway, you'll find the 3rd boss, Naraxas, waiting for you, and she is a stationary boss, so that means that she, of course, does something very bad if there's no one there for her to hit, which in this case is a large party-wide nature hit in Putrid Skies, so tanks, be aware of this. You almost always want to be in melee range of her, but more on that later. In terms of what her abilities are, the bulk of the group damage is going to be coming from hurling rocks, which is just random target physical damage every 5 seconds, as well as Toxic Wretch, which both spawns poison puddles all over the place that deal ticking damage you want to avoid, and also applies a 5-second poison to the entire party, which deals pretty heavy ticking damage over the duration, so having a poison spell or two here can help alleviate a lot of damage. She'll also occasionally cast Rancid Maw, and this just shoots poison damage at 2 random players. This deals just a direct hit, and then also leaves behind a puddle wherever they are, and this puddle will slow anything inside of it by 50%. This can be useful in a couple of different ways. The first is it can slow the Worm Speaker Devout adds that jump down from the side of the room and attempt to run to Naraxas and sacrifice themselves to her. And if they're successful in doing this, it gives the boss a massive 50% damage increase that will stack. This means that you want to kill these adds before they're able to get to her and she's able to eat them, and the positioning of these slow puddles can actually help buy you some more time. But it's not the end of the world if you aren't able to position these slow puddles correctly. It just means you'll need to commit maybe a little bit more damage to the mobs so that you can kill them before they sacrifice themselves to the boss. That big damage buff does not go on her. The other use for the slowing puddles is actually for your tank, as at 100 energy, Naraxas will try and consume them, constantly pulling the tank towards her with Spiked Tongue. If she successfully pulls them in, she deals a ton of physical damage to them as she consumes them and gains a stack of that 50% damage increase, so definitely something that you want to avoid. Puddles aren't the only option to escape this though if you're a tank, as if you have enough mobility you can just outrun this pull on your own, but also there's some eggs on the side of the room where if you position yourself correctly you can actually just have yourself be pulled directly into this egg and never be pulled into the boss. Aside from this, the boss does enrage at 20%, gaining 20% attack speed and physical damage. Otherwise though, the fight will just repeat as normal from here. Once you defeat Naraxas and jump down into the final bosses area, there are 3 new mobs you'll face. The Understone Demolisher is one of them here. This guy has the Char Skin ability, and basically this will just turn him into a colossal Char Skin mob, causing him to gain 100% increased damage, and then occasionally cast Burning Hatred, which is just a fixate on a random player, so becomes really, really big and tries to murder a random player. The abilities are stoppable though, so if you don't stop the Charskin cast, note that you can stop that Burning Hatred cast and just prevent that fixate from going onto a random player and keep this mob on your tank. Rockbound Trappers are also in this area. They have that same Jagged Disc cast of random target physical damage as we saw earlier in the dungeon, but they also have Bound, which is a kickable and stoppable cast on your tank, which is a physical dot and stun for 4 seconds, so you will want to make sure this cast never goes off. Finally, the Ember Husk Dominators are lieutenant mobs that are just giant scorpions in this area. They have a few abilities. One, Ember Swipe, another frontal. Yet again, this is the Dungeon of Frontals, I guess, on your tank, just a physical hit, so make sure no one is on the tank. Crystal Spike is just some instant cast, random target nature damage when you pull these guys. This can get out of hand pretty quickly. That's why you want to focus these guys down whenever you are pulling them. And then finally, Frenzy is a 25% attack speed and damage done increase in rage effect. Have a Soothe, great. Otherwise, beware that random target damage and that frontal will be hitting harder during this buff. That brings us to the final boss of the dungeon, Dargrul, the Underking, who is so big that his steps actually deal fire damage to the entire party through Magma Breaker. So as a tank, just try not to move him too much, which is potentially easier said than done, thanks to his Landslide ability, which is a tank-targeted frontal line attack, again frontals, that deals heavy nature damage to anyone hit and knocks them back as well, meaning you really want to have either a way to leap, charge, teleport back to the boss quickly, or if you don't have any of these things, what you can do is instead position yourself so that you're shot into either one of the walls or one of the nearby obstacles in the room, just so you don't move very much, if at all. Landslide is also just the first part of a 2-part tank combo, as it's always followed by the Molten Crash tank hit, which is slightly smaller in terms of how big the hit is, but it's still relatively large, and it is also a nature hit. Something else to be aware of are the crystal spikes that the boss will spawn under random players. You want to avoid the initial swirly that spawns, and note that while these crystals can be destroyed by that landslide tank frontal, you do actually want to make sure that you never hit them, because you want these crystals around to help you deal with 2 boss abilities. The first is the Molten Char skin. Just like the Trash Mob, these guys will spawn and then fixate a random player after delay, but they'll also be gaining a 2% stacking speed and damage done buff, so they're no longer going to be able to completely ignore these guys. You can't just kite them forever, you can't just stop them and they'll go back onto the tank. These guys are scary. So what you do here is you actually have the fixated player kite them into one of the nearby crystals, and that will stun them for 10 seconds and cause them to take a double damage for that 10-second duration, which will allow you to quickly eliminate them by just cleaving off of the boss, so you don't actually need to commit a ton of priority damage into them. You want to make sure that you don't destroy all of your crystals though, as at full energy, Dargrul will begin channeling Magma Wave, and this will deal lethal fire damage to anyone within line of sight of the boss, meaning you will need to hide behind one of these crystals before he gets to 100 energy to avoid getting hit, as at least on the PTR, this damage did start just immediately upon the cast without much notice, so be careful there, otherwise the fight just repeats. That concludes the ability portion of the guide. Now let's take a look at a simple, easy to execute, pug-friendly route that you can use early on in the season, which again will be linked down in the description below if you want to import it for your own use. A note before getting into it, the goal here is not to provide you with the most optimal route available, but instead to be a starting point while you're still learning the dungeon. I've avoided things like skips as well as larger pulls, but feel free to combine things or just execute on invis skips or shroud skips, whatever you see fit. Now to start off here, you see this is a relatively large pull, but a big thing here, Vile Shard Crawlers, these are basically non-mobs. They don't really do much at all. You just leave those puddles on death, so you can pretty much ignore them entirely. They have like next to no HP as well. The big scary guy here is the Ember Shard Scorpion. We're adding a couple Nashers, but you just want to focus your stop on the Scorpion, and then make sure that you don't get hit by the frontals from these Tar Spitter Lurkers. I do have you skirt around the edge here. It's not a big deal if you pull one or two of these extra crawlers here. They do not fully pull these two big guys who you're trying to avoid. Worst case though, you can always just jump in the water for a little bit and swim over to these drudges here, which is probably what I recommend doing for safety. It's just a Nasher and 3 drudges who do nothing but hit your tank. And then you've got the first boss. You can take your barrel run here, and then you've got this little gauntlet kind of deal to get through to the next boss. I recommend just pulling one breaker at a time because I mentioned how dangerous those mobs are currently. So you pull these two guys. This guy pats back and forth, and you can run past him on either side of his patrol. If you mess up this, though, not a big deal. There's no breaker in this next pull here, so you can just pull him into this pull, no problem. So try and skip him. If it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. Note this drummer will run straight to this Drums of War here, so make sure you get a stop on him. Other than that, though, pretty straightforward. Moving through, you've got a couple pelters and a breaker here. Again, watching that breaker, he's got a frontal, and then he drops puddles on literally everyone from the sky. Hard to see. Make sure you're moving when it goes out. Then you've got a little 2-pack here with a Hulk that you are forced to pull. Another Hulk is up here, so tanks beware. If you need to change the order of these pulls just so you don't pull 2 Hulks back to back because you need defensives, do that. Do 9 and 10 if you can before you do this Hulk pull. The pulls in this area, again, can definitely be shifted depending on your comfort. Again, I've tried to do only 1 breaker pull per pull, and I've also tried to do only 1 shaper per pull so you aren't overwhelmed with kicks. But these pulls can be easily combined to do 2 pulls in this area instead of 3. If you want to do more, not a problem whatsoever. After the boss, I've done this. You can actually skip this pack, but again, someone's going to butt pull it, so I pull it anyway. It's working to the route. Moving forward, you've got 2 pulls before the 3rd boss here, Naraxas, and then you can jump down into this area. There's a little bunch of mobs here that you can actually walk behind and easily skip these 2 mobs, so I put that little tip in. So just walk around here, walk on top of this 3-pack, and then you walk down to the boss's arena. You do have to kill all these mobs here because similar to Freehold, if you've seen that video, or Noku Defensive, these mobs are linked to the boss. So if you pull the boss, these mobs will pull as well. And probably will be some tech to skip these entirely, particularly these guys over on the side with like a rogue, a hunter, a mage, or a night elf, or just some player dying after pulling these mobs, and you pull the boss, just to make sure you don't have to ever pull half of the trash down here. So that's probably going to be a thing, but at least for now I would just recommend killing both packs and then engaging the boss himself at the end. that's all we've got for this video, guys. Hopefully you found this guide useful, and if you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like it. Guides just like this one coming out for all 8 dungeons, and advanced dungeon guides will be coming out shortly after that, diving into tips and tricks for higher keys, as well as raid boss guides for Avarice. So just be on the lookout for all of those videos. If you have any questions about Nelth's Lair here, drop those down in the comments below, or come stop by my Twitch channel at Tactics, and I'll be happy to answer those questions there. Of course, I have to give a big thank you to all of my supporters over on Patreon. I wouldn't be able to do any of this without your support. Otherwise, thanks everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.